If you're not addressing what's going on, there could be some legal implications that are out there that you may be unaware of. But as things are changing, and I'll use the example of that risk on the bottom slowly moving up, well, now your risk level is changing, your legal liability is changing, you're putting other clients, and let's say you're in healthcare, you could be putting lives in danger because you're not now addressing that gap
Yep,
that is
yep.
changing.
Yeah, all of that could actually, it was very funny there. You mentioned healthcare. There was a huge fire of a large medical distribution center called Midline that was in Tracy, California last week. It was it was a warehouse that was acres and acres and acres, and somehow I haven't followed the story recently to see if they discovered what the fire was caused from. It burned to the ground. Now, just think, and that's sort of another idea of a supply chain related issue, right? If you're in the medical supply business, or where you buy supplies, hospitals, clinics, doctors' offices, blah, 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 blah. Just like, same thing about, what are gloves made out of? Oh, oil products. I mean, they just lost a zillion, billion, whatever was there, but it was whatever in a hospital or a healthcare office that just disappeared. And so then I think and I thought to myself when I saw that burning, I thought, wow, I wonder how that's going to be impacted by the Iran war and the oil that probably made those gloves. And by the way, those gloves probably were made from in China, and the oil from Iran went to China. I mean, you could just sort of see how it all kind of, holy moly. So, the supply chain issue is a really important one. I think we've talked about this ad nauseum for many years, but it's something that this is the time to have that conversation. If it's not being had already in your organization, regardless of what you do, that this will impact us in ways that we probably don't understand yet. Because if it goes on much longer, this is going to be a crisis in some groups.
Yeah. Yeah, this is, I think we said it some time ago. This is our time to shine. So
Yes.
you've got to do something. You can't just sit there and talk about it. You've got to get somebody's ear. And you mentioned a whole bunch of different groups. Doesn't have to be the CEO.
Right, right, right. I mean, I would really ask people, and if you feel stuck, like I'm not sure how to go about this, brainstorm with another colleague, brainstorm with another continuity planner, maybe in a different company, or, find people within your organization. Maybe it's in risk, or maybe it's in supply chain, or, and have conversations about like, well, if this keeps going on, what are the kind of things that we should be thinking about? What are going to be the impacts? Blah, 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 blah. Because the longer it goes on, let's say that you're kind of a middle-sized company. Well, the big companies are probably going to have more juice to get supplies and things than you are. And so the small, if the idea is that you might be a regular, you might be a good customer and a regular blah, blah, blah. But if things start getting tight in whatever the supply is you're buying, because of, again, the closure of the strait and oil related issues, then you might end up losing out because you're not big enough and other people are going to basically undercut you.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a real risk these days right now because
Oh,
we've already,
yeah.
because of the prices of fuel, we've seen an airline go under and others threatened right now.
Yes.
So it
Yes.
is a real thing that is happening, not hypothetically. It's really happening.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think the cascading issue, I mean, for example, just in travel, look at the impact of the cost of oil and travel, jet travel. I mean, many airplanes, I still fly a lot. Many airplanes I'm in are empty. They're empty. Well, airlines can only do that for so long. You can only run a plane with not very many people in it for so long. So I imagine what will happen if this continues on. And we're now in June, so we're starting the travel season supposedly for the summer. Would not be surprised if planes start being canceled because they're trying to consolidate, mass, right? When I came back from a trip recently, I think in a plane that should have had several hundred people in it, there were probably 25. Okay, that's a pretty expensive ticket for the airline.
Hmm,
Very
very.
comfortable for all of us that were there, but it's very expensive. And you still have to have the same kind of staffing, blah, 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 blah. So I think that it begins to cascade. And I think, and there's already a lot of conversations here in the United States that people are limiting their travel for the holidays during the summer. Instead of taking a traditional, let's get in the car, which is very traditional in America, do a road trip or something. That ain't happening. Now, in Canada, is road trips kind of a popular way of summer vacations?
Oh yeah, everybody heads north to the cottage countries, or in the west out to the mountains and lakes and things like that. And same thing out east and central Canada. Everyone does it here. We just have much further to go before we reach somewhere. But
Right, right,
but yeah, that's a common thing. And it's funny you mentioned that because there was a news report I was listening to, the local talk radio news, and they were saying that people are changing their trips. A lot of trips are now staying home because of the cost of fuel, cost
right.
of whether it be flights or cars or anything, and they're not going as much, which now will impact these tourist destinations.
How
So
about that?
now it's having a further impact already. Hotels and tourist attractions and funlands and things that are out there. There aren't the people going there because they can't afford it because things are so expensive because this ongoing war has gone 4 months longer than it should have.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then you sort of understand how that plays out, the trickle down effect of that in the economy. So people are driving to go to a resort to, spend a week there with their kids. So that means they need less wait staff, less maids. They're not using as much lawn. I mean, they're not buying as much food. It just down the food chain. So then you have this huge economic impact that impacts an entire region that depends on tourism. And I'm sure in Canada, like many places in the United States, the 3 or 4 months that you have of the travel season, like from like middle of May till probably the middle of September, that's like the time that many of these places are making their most money, right? Is that time.
Yeah,
And then it kind of dries up and it might peak up a little bit depending on where they are and around the holidays and Christmas. But other than that, you make your money in 4 months. And then what if you're not making that money because people aren't coming?
yeah,
And so I think that's another thing is the economic impact of the war will be great
yeah.
and significant, which then impacts an entire area and a region. And then you sort of follow that food chain, right?
It circled right back to the very beginning. It impacts everyone's planning.
Mhm.
You can't plan, and what you have planned is changing.
Yep, yep, yep.
And then because things are changing so fast, what you've planned that you changed can't keep up with the pace of the change from the messages we're getting. So
Right.
we're stuck in this weird, loop here.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I don't see how we're going to get out of that. And so, the question I think about it from our perspective as of what we do for a living, both in crisis management and in continuity planning, do we need to, think about some of these bigger, broader, deeper issues? And maybe, what would be interesting, because I love to do exercises, right? I do them all the time.
Hmm.
Then maybe it'd be interesting to do an exercise like, what if this went on for another 4 months, depending on the kind of business that you have? What would be the impacts? And sort of play that out and go from a crisis management perspective about, what if this went on through December or, October or whatever. The idea is that what would happen in your organization, and have the sort of the baseline narrative is kind of where we are right now, and then kind of like have like little sections, little vignettes of like, okay, now it's August, hasn't changed. Okay, now it's October, hasn't changed. What would be the impacts to our business? What would we be doing? And sometimes, it's one thing for you to have a story in your mind, but if you actually make people play through it and just develop injects that would push those items. And maybe what starts to happen is there starts to be layoffs in the organization because you're able to do less work, or there's an impact related to that, or you run out of certain things because those supplies have been exhausted and there's nobody else making, those kinds of things that you would never think of, really.
Yeah.
I think
But
you could easily do it in kind of a very simple, kind of a loosely designed kind of basic tabletop where you drive it with some slides and maybe give out some injects that really progress the story. Like every month or two, you sort of, now we're moving forward to, August, and now it's going to be October. I think it would be interesting
mhm.
to play
Well,
that out.
I want to add another piece to those scenarios, that because prices are going up uh, everywhere for everything,
Yep.
what happens now with your staff, the single mom or the single dad, that I can't afford to drive to the office anymore.
Mm-hmm.
It's costing me too much, with that and daycare and the price of everything else. I can't
Yep.
come to the office because I can't afford to come to the office.
Yep.
Now, how is that going to impact your operations? Because it's not just the organization being impacted, people are being impacted. And if you've never taken people into account before with your scenario testing, like you mentioned, throw that nugget in there and see what happens.
Yep. 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 Because I think, so when we actually do exercises, we always focus on five things all the time. The first one is always people. And this one, to your point, this particular problem has a lot of deep people issues. And the longer it goes on, as you just articulated, the more people issues there's going to be. So there's always going to be people issues. Then think about the impacts to the facility. The longer this goes on, what does that mean? So, okay, let's say you've got 3 buildings. Well, maybe people aren't coming to work. So are you going to keep all of them operational? Okay, no, we're going to shut 2 of them down for a while. Just put them on kind of a, bubble wrap them, if you will, right? So the idea is, how do you do that? And then what does that mean for, the whole facilities management of the organization and blah, 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 blah. So that's the next thing. And so then the third thing would be, what about information technology? What about information security? Would you be, depending on the kind of work that your company does, would you be more prone to phishing and hacking? And, what kind of phishing programs or plans might some people be doing to you based on what you do for a living, tying it somehow back to, the Iran war and the cost of gas and things like that.
Yeah.
And then the fourth thing we always talk about in exercises is basically business operations, right? Everything related to what you do for a living. And so the plans to keep things operational and keep functioning. And, what if you're not able to do certain things anymore because of either costs of what's available, or because it's not available at all anymore?
Yeah.
And then the last thing is really reputation and brand, and what are your customers saying about you? What are your stockholders saying about you if you're publicly traded? What's the world saying about you and how you're performing based on this issue? So I think you could create a kind of interesting exercise to sort of be forward thinking, really driven by where we are right now, and then kind of move it forward in a couple of steps, another month, another month, another month, and then work through the kind of problems that would be forecast based on what you do for a living and have the impact of you not being able to get either materials or products because of the oil issue, or that the cost is too high.
Yeah.
I think that would be interesting to play
That
out.
would be interesting. That would be. We're coming to the end of the show. Do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share that maybe we haven't touched on with regards to the ongoing impacts from the U.S.-Iran war?
I just think the thing I would just say to everyone is to really, again, find credible news sources to be getting your information, and we gave a list of the, like the CBC and the CNN and, all the major channels, if you will. Make sure that you're following. I think what I've noticed in our colleagues is that people are starting to tune this out because it's just the same thing all the time. And I think you can't really tune it out, even though I totally understand you want to. You need to stay abreast of what's going on because you need to put your hat on, which is, well, what does this mean to my organization? So keep listening to the news, follow credible sources. The second is I really encourage that people do some really brainstorming with the right people, supply chain people, purchasing people, et cetera, to really understand this more deeply. The third thing is really talking to the executives and your executive sponsor, which I hope you have, about what you need to be doing and what they should be thinking about, and really raising it to that next level. Because I think that gives us an opportunity to shine as to what we do for a living. So to really kind of have some clear steps about what you're going to do. And if you get stuck, find another continuity planning person that you could talk to. If you belong to some of the many associations, ACP and others, that brainstorm with somebody. Don't be, if you're, especially if you're a single planner in an organization, don't feel flat-footed that you can't come up with all of this yourself. Brainstorm with other people, or brainstorm with people in your risk department, so that you can really try and expose as many of these things as possible. And then you want to make sure that you're getting that to the right people so they can actually think about it and do something about it. Because I think we're in this, we're in this sort of constant, it's Groundhog Day every day, right? And we have to stop having that attitude, and we need to really move forward now and think more aggressively about what we should be thinking about and doing.
Yeah. On that note, we've come to the end of the show. Regina, thank you so much for talking about this. I think we said we were probably going to do about a 15-minute episode, and we ended up going well beyond that
How
and have
about
so
that?
much more to cover. So always great chatting with you. Thank you so much for sharing your time and thoughts with us.
As always, it's great to be with you, Alex. Thank you.